If you spend your life protecting your family's reputation, there's a price you don't realize you're paying until the bill is handed to you in public. Last Friday night, I stood in a rented ballroom in downtown Chicago, holding a folded program with my mother's nonprofit logo embossed in gold. The tables were set, the wine was poured, and my husband was already seated where my name used to be. A volunteer quietly slid my place card out from under a crystal glass and set it behind the podium instead. My mother didn't look at me when she stepped on stage. She smiled, thanked the donors, and introduced my stepsister as the future owner of a building I thought was half mine. If you've never had your place quietly taken away in a room full of people, it's hard to explain how fast your body understands it before your mind does. I knew something was wrong the moment I stepped into the ballroom at the Palmer House and felt that thin pause in the air, like the room had already adjusted to my absence. The charity gala had been my mother's idea of perfection. Black ties, white tablecloths, pressed so sharply they looked starched into obedience. Waiters moved in straight lines, carrying trays of champagne flutes that chimed softly every time they shifted their grip. A string quartet played near the windows, their bows moving in slow, polite arcs. Everything looked expensive, in a way that tried not to look like it was trying. I checked my phone. 6:47 p.m. We were early. My mother hated being late, and I had learned a long time ago that arriving on time to her events was the safest way to avoid a comment later. Daniel stood beside me, adjusting his jacket the way he always did when he was nervous, smoothing the sleeves even though they were already smooth. He leaned down and said, "Do you want to grab a drink before the speeches start?" "In a minute," I said. I was still looking for the seating chart. The board had decided this year's gala would be bigger than usual. New donors, new partnerships, new energy. That was the phrase my mother had used on the phone when she invited me. New energy. She said it the way some people say clean slate, like it could erase whatever came before. The seating chart was mounted on an easel near the entrance, printed on thick ivory paper. I stepped closer and ran my finger down the left column, scanning alphabetically. Carter, Daniel, Carter, Emily, Carter, Linda, Hale, Madison. I frowned and leaned in. The names were neat and evenly spaced, no corrections, no ink marks. My mother's name was there, right at the center table. Madison's name was there too, placed beside a major donor I recognized from last year. Daniel's name was there? Mine wasn't. I scanned again, slower this time, telling myself I was tired, that the lighting was throwing me off. I moved my finger down the page, letter by letter. "No, Emily Carter. Dan," I said quietly. He stepped closer. "What's up?" My name isn't on the chart. He looked where I was pointing, then back at me. His expression didn't change much, but his jaw tightened slightly, the way it did when he was thinking through something he didn't like. "Maybe it's a mistake," he said. "That's what I wanted it to be. A mistake. A formatting error. A volunteer oversight. Something boring and fixable." A woman in a black dress with a clipboard approached us. She smiled in the careful way people do when they're managing logistics and emotions at the same time. "Hi there," she said. "Can I help you find your table?" "Yes," I said. "I think my name might be missing." She glanced at her clipboard. "What's your name?" "Emily Carter." She flipped a page, then another. Her smile stayed in place, but it thinned slightly. "Oh," she said. "One moment." She stepped aside and spoke quietly into a headset. I could hear the murmur of the room around us, forks being set down, chairs scraping lightly against the floor. Someone laughed too loudly near the bar. The woman came back. "You're with the family, right?" "Yes," I said. "I'm Linda Carter's daughter." She nodded. "Okay. Your table assignment was adjusted earlier this week." "Adjusted to where?" I asked. She hesitated. "You'll be seated near the stage," she said, gesturing vaguely toward the front of the room. That didn't make sense. The front tables were reserved for donors and board members. That's where my mother always sat. That's where I had always sat. Daniel touched my elbow. "Can we see the place card?" The woman nodded quickly. She led us toward the tables, weaving between guests who were already seated. As we passed the center table, I saw my mother. Linda Carter. Perfect posture. Cream-colored gown, hair pinned just right. She was laughing at something. Richard, my stepfather, had said, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Madison sat on her other side, her phone face down on the table, her attention fully on the man leaning in to talk to her. She looked exactly like she always did at events like this. Relaxed, confident, like the room belonged to her. The woman stopped near the podium. Not at a table, near the podium. She reached under the edge of the stage and pulled out a place card. Emily Carter. It had been folded neatly in half. "There you go," she said, handing it to me. Two-Face. "Here?" I said, looking around. "Yes," she said. "Standing room. For now. We're a little tight on seats this evening. Standing room." At my mother's gala, Daniel didn't say anything. He took the card from my hand and turned it over. There was no table number on it, just my name, printed in the same elegant font as everyone else's, like it was pretending nothing was wrong. "I'll check with Linda," the woman added quickly. "She'll want to make sure you're comfortable." I have. She walked away before I could respond. I stood there, holding nothing now, my hands empty and cold. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears. The podium loomed in front of me, a clear acrylic stand with the nonprofit's logo etched into the front. Behind it, a large banner hung from the wall, announcing the evening's theme and celebrating a major expansion project. The building. The building that had once been my grandfather's brownstone before it was renovated and donated to the foundation. The building my mother had told me, 3 years earlier, would someday be partly mine. Not as a gift, but as a responsibility, she had said. A legacy. "Do you want to sit somewhere else?" Daniel asked quietly. "No," I said. "I want to understand what's happening." He nodded once. "Okay." The lights dimmed slightly, signaling that the program was about to begin. Guests turned toward the stage, conversations tapering off. I caught my mother's eye for just a second. Her smile faltered, then returned. She gave me a small nod. Like you give someone you recognize but don't need to speak to. She didn't wave. She didn't motion for me to come closer. She turned back to the room. Linda stepped up to the podium with practiced ease. The microphone picked up her voice immediately, clear and warm. "Good evening, everyone," she said. "Thank you all for being here tonight." Applause filled the room. I stood off to the side, just out of the main sightline, close enough to see her clearly, far enough to feel invisible. She thanked the donors. She thanked the board. She thanked her husband. She talked about growth, opportunity, and vision. Then she smiled wider and gestured toward Madison. "And I want to recognize someone very special," she said. "Madison Hale, who will be stepping into a leadership role as we move forward." More applause. Madison stood and waved, her smile easy and bright. My mother continued. "Madison brings a fresh perspective and a strong sense of ownership to this organization." Ownership. The word landed hard. I looked up at the banner again, at the building's photo printed behind the text. For the first time that night, I noticed something small and strange. The plaque under the photo listed the property's dedication. It had my mother's name, and Richard's, and Madison's. My name wasn't there. Daniel leaned closer to me, his voice steady. He said softly. "Whatever you think you know about tonight, I don't think it's the whole story." And in that moment, standing beside a podium that wasn't meant for me, I realized that everything I had believed about my place in this family was already gone. I kept my face still while the room clapped for Madison, because that's what you do when you've spent your whole life learning how to survive other people's celebrations. My cheeks felt hot anyway, not from embarrassment exactly, but from that familiar mix of anger and shame that comes when someone makes a decision about you without even bothering to say it out loud. Daniel didn't take his eyes off my mother. He stood with his hands loosely at his sides, calm in a way that almost made me more uneasy. He was calm the way a person is when they've already seen the edge of the cliff, and they're deciding whether to warn you or let you notice it yourself. Linda kept talking. She thanked a state senator by name. She joked about construction delays like they were charming little hiccups. She smiled at donors in the front row as if she was speaking to them personally, as if the rest of us were just part of the backdrop. I looked around the ballroom and tried to locate where I was supposed to exist. There were round tables close to the stage, with neat rows of place cards and small glass candles flickering inside votives. There were tables farther back, still nice, but clearly not the ones people wanted to be seen at. And there was me, standing beside the podium like a coat that didn't have a hanger. A waiter walked by with a tray of drinks. He glanced at me and slowed, then kept going. He didn't offer. Maybe he assumed I was staff. Maybe he assumed I was supposed to be standing there. I remembered my mother's voice on the phone 2 weeks ago, cheerful and bright. Emily, you have to come. It'll mean so much to me. This is a big night. That was the language she used when she wanted something. Means so much. Big night. The implication was always that I'd regret it if I didn't show up. And that regret would be mine to carry alone. My mother and I didn't fight in dramatic ways. We never threw dishes. We never screamed across a kitchen. Our conflicts were quieter, more controlled. She didn't punish you with rage. She punished you with omission. When I was 12, I made the honor roll and brought home the certificate. She glanced at it while stirring pasta sauce and said, "That's nice," then asked if I'd cleaned my room. The next day, she framed a newspaper clipping about a neighbor's son getting into an elite private high school and hung it in the hallway. When I was 17, I got a full scholarship to a state university. She told her friends, "Emily's very responsible, the way you describe someone who pays bills on time, not someone you're proud of." When I was 24, I got hired by the county health department. I was excited because it felt real. It felt like a job that mattered. I thought she would finally see that I wasn't drifting. She nodded and said, "Well, it's stable. Not glamorous, but stable." Stable became the word she used to shrink me. Then she met Richard at a fundraiser. Richard Hale, real estate developer, silver hair, smooth voice, a man who knew how to make you feel like you were in on something just by standing near him. He took her from our old split-level house in Naperville to a condo with a doorman downtown. He took her from potlucks with neighbors to charity boards and benefits and summer weekends in Michigan. And he brought Madison. Madison was 21 when they got married. She had the kind of confidence that comes from never being corrected in a way that sticks. She wasn't cruel in obvious ways. She didn't insult me directly. She just lived as if my life was a rough draft, and hers was the final version. Madison always wore clothes that looked effortless, but weren't. She always had a story about someone she'd met, somewhere exclusive, somewhere I couldn't picture myself. She called herself a philanthropy consultant once, and when I asked what that meant, she laughed like I'd said something adorable. "It means I help brands connect with causes," she said. "It's strategy." I didn't have strategy. I had spreadsheets. I had compliance checklists. I had inspections. I had days where I stood in a public building explaining to someone why they couldn't ignore safety regulations just because they didn't feel like spending the money. I worked in a world where consequences were real and paperwork mattered, which was exactly why my mother treated it like it wasn't impressive. Daniel came into my life quietly. We met when I was assigned to review a vendor contract for a county program, and his company was the IT subcontractor. He wasn't the loudest person in the room. He didn't try to dominate conversations. He listened, then asked one or two questions that made people pause. That's what I liked about him. He didn't need to perform. When we got married, my mother smiled for photos and told everyone Daniel was nice. Nice was the word she used when she couldn't find anything else to say. She never asked him about his work. She never asked him about his goals. She just assumed that if he wasn't flashy, he wasn't important. At our wedding reception, Richard pulled Daniel aside and talked to him for 10 minutes, then came back to the table and said, "Good guy, hard worker." That was all. Daniel didn't seem bothered, but I saw the way his eyes tracked the room afterward, like he was filing things away. Now, standing in this ballroom, I felt those old dynamics tightening around me again. My mother on stage, shining. Madison near the center table, receiving applause. Richard, laughing like the world owed him a good time. And me, somehow not just overlooked, but actively placed out of view. Linda finished her speech and handed the microphone to the auctioneer. The room shifted into the next part of the program, the comfortable rhythm of bidding and laughing and raising paddles for the right causes. People turned to each other with that warm, generous expression people wear when they're spending money in public. Daniel leaned in close, his voice low. "Do you want to talk to her now, or after the auction?" My throat felt tight. Now. We walked toward the center table. Every step felt like a decision, not because I was afraid of a scene, but because I knew exactly how my mother would frame it if I said the wrong thing in the wrong tone. She had always been good at making me look unreasonable for reacting to something she'd done on purpose. As we approached, Madison looked up first. Her smile was immediate, glossy. "Emily," she said, like we were old friends. "You made it." Linda looked at me with a practiced expression that could pass for concern. "Honey." There you are. There you are." Like I'd been misplaced. "I couldn't find my name," I said. I held my voice steady. On the seating chart, Richard leaned back in his chair, sipping his drink. These events get hectic, he said. Lots of moving parts. Linda's gaze flicked to Daniel, then back to me. We adjusted the seating. It wasn't personal. J's, road, day, road, one. It wasn't. I felt my fingers curl slightly at my sides. It feels personal when my place card is behind the podium. Madison's eyebrows lifted. Just a little. She was enjoying this, I could tell. Not because she wanted me to suffer exactly, but because it confirmed her position. Linda lowered her voice, leaning closer as if she was protecting me from being overheard. Emily, please don't do this here. Do what? I asked. Ask why I'm not seated with you. Her eyes narrowed the tiniest bit. The donor table is full, and Madison is taking on a bigger role. Tonight is about optics. Optics. There it was. The word that explained everything. Daniel spoke for the first time, calm and even. Where exactly is Emily supposed to sit? Linda smiled at him like he was sweet for trying. That's not an answer, Daniel said, still quiet. Richard's tone sharpened. Look, man, it's just a chair. Linda placed her hand lightly on the table, a gesture meant to end the conversation. Emily, you're being sensitive. Sensitive. Another old word? A word that made my reaction the problem, instead of her choice. I swallowed hard. And the building plaque, I said. My name isn't on it. For a split second, Linda's expression shifted. Not guilt, not surprise, annoyance. Like I'd noticed something I wasn't supposed to notice yet. Madison tilted her head. Oh, she said lightly. That's probably just because the paperwork is still being finalized. My stomach dropped. The words sounded ordinary, but they made something inside me go cold, because I knew that in my world, paperwork didn't just happen. Someone signed, someone filed, someone made a decision. Linda's smile returned, careful again. We'll talk about this later, she said. No, I said, and my voice came out steadier than I felt. We're talking about it now. Around us, conversation at nearby tables softened. The room didn't go silent, but it shifted, like a crowd sensing movement. Linda's eyes held mine for a long moment. Then she said, very quietly, You don't understand what's at stake. Daniel's hand hovered near my back, not touching, just there. Emily understands stakes, he said. That's literally her job. Linda's jaw tightened. And that's when I realized something that landed heavier than the missing seat or the missing plaque. My mother wasn't improvising tonight. This wasn't chaos ord. This was planned. Me standing off to the side, me being kept out of photos, me being reduced to a complication. Linda looked past me, toward the stage, where the auctioneer was smiling and warming the crowd up for the big announcement later. She leaned closer again, her voice almost pleasant. Just get through the night, she murmured. Don't embarrass us. Us. Not me. Not family. Us. Meaning her, Richard, Madison. The image they were selling. Daniel's voice stayed low, but I heard a new edge in it. Linda, he said, you might want to be careful with what you announce tonight. My mother's eyes flicked to him, annoyed. Excuse me? Daniel didn't answer her directly. He looked at me instead, and the way he looked at me made my chest tighten. He said softly. I need you to stay close to me tonight. I stared at him, my heart beating hard enough to feel it in my throat. Why? He hesitated just long enough to make the air feel thin. Then he said, because the version of this family you've been trying to keep intact is about to break in front of everyone. My mother's eyes held Daniel's for a beat. Then she looked away as if he'd said something childish. She leaned back into her chair and turned her attention toward the stage, where the auctioneer was calling out numbers and people were lifting their paddles with practiced smiles. The message was clear. This conversation was inconvenient. My feelings were inconvenient. My presence was something to manage. Emily, Linda said without looking at me, go find your seat. We'll talk later. I didn't move. My feet felt anchored to the carpet. Where is my seat? I asked. Not near the stage. Where? Richard exhaled through his nose, a small sound of irritation. Madison leaned forward, her voice soft and friendly, the way you speak to a person you're trying to calm down on camera. It's okay, she said. Everyone's stressed, like the problem was the room, not the deliberate decision to erase me. Daniel's hand finally touched my back, a light pressure between my shoulder blades. It steadied me without pushing me. "Let's step out for a second," he said quietly. I didn't want to step out. I didn't want to be the woman who caused a scene and then was conveniently removed from it. But I also felt my throat tightening, and I knew if I stayed right there, I might say something that would give my mother exactly what she wanted. Proof that I was emotional, unstable, embarrassing. So I nodded once, stiffly, and let Daniel guide me away from the center table. We moved toward the hallway outside the ballroom, past a coat check and a small table with event programs stacked in perfect alignment. The moment we were out of the main room, the sound changed. The laughter softened. The auctioneer's voice became muffled. The air felt cooler. Daniel stopped near a framed black and white photo of the hotel lobby and looked at me. "Breathe," he said. I tried. My lungs felt like they were stuck behind my ribs. "I don't understand," I said, and the words came out like they were scraping my throat. She didn't even deny it. She didn't say it was a mistake. Daniel's eyes stayed on mine. "Because it wasn't a mistake." I swallowed hard. "Then what is it?" He hesitated, and that hesitation did something to me. It made my stomach drop again, because Daniel wasn't a dramatic person. He didn't hesitate to be mysterious. If he paused, it meant he was choosing his words carefully. "I think," he said slowly, "your mom and Richard have been moving things around legally for a while." "Moving what around?" I asked. "My seat? My name? My existence?" Daniel's mouth tightened. "The building." The word hit like a weight. The brownstone had been my grandfather's. He bought it in the 80s when Chicago was rougher and cheaper, when people didn't look at those blocks and see historic charm. He looked at it and saw a place where people could gather. He used the bottom floor as a community meeting space. When I was little, I sat on the stairs eating powdered donuts while adults talked about neighborhood schools and safety and jobs. After he died, my mother inherited it. She took it as proof that she'd been chosen, that she was the responsible one. She started the foundation 2 years later and used the building as headquarters, telling everyone it was a family legacy. Die in hand. 3 years ago, when the foundation began expanding, she called me over for coffee and slid a folder across the table like it was a gift. "I want you to be part of this," she'd said. "You understand service. You understand systems. Someday, when I step back, this building will be half yours." Half? Not all. Half? Even then, it was conditional. But it had meant something to me. It meant I wasn't just tolerated. It meant I belonged in the story she was telling about herself. Now, standing in a hallway outside a ballroom full of donors, I felt that promise crumble into something ugly. "You think she took me off?" I said. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He pulled his phone out, glanced at the screen, then put it back in his pocket. "I don't think," he said. "I know there were filings." My hands went cold. "How do you know?" He looked at me, and there was a flicker of something in his expression that I couldn't place. Not fear, not guilt, more like reluctance. "Because I saw a notice," he said. "A few months ago. Something crossed my desk." "What desk?" I asked sharply, then immediately felt the strange twist of it. Daniel's job was IT risk. He reviewed systems, contracts, security protocols. He wasn't supposed to be seeing property filings. He exhaled quietly. "Emily, don't spiral." "Not yet. Just listen." I forced myself to be still. "The foundation has vendors," he said. "Tech vendors, payment platforms, security, data storage. They sign contracts. Sometimes those contracts touch real estate, leasing, insurance, asset declarations. I saw your mother's signature on something that didn't match what she'd told you." I stared at him. "And you didn't say anything?" His eyes didn't flinch. "You begged me not to get involved with your family." I did. I remembered saying it. More than once. I remembered the way my mother could twist any outside interference into an attack. I remembered how she could punish people by freezing them out. I had wanted to protect Daniel from that. Now that protection felt like a trap. Daniel's voice softened. "I didn't want to set off a bomb in your life without you asking me to." I looked down at my hands and realized my fingers were shaking. I pressed them into my palms. "So what now?" Daniel stared past me for a moment, toward the closed doors of the ballroom. "Now," he said, "we find out what she's planning to announce." My pulse spiked. "Announce what?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, "Did you see the banner? The plaque under the building photo?" "Yes," I said. "Her name. Richards. Madison's." Daniel's jaw tightened again. "That means the paperwork is done. They're not just thinking about doing it. They did it." I leaned back against the wall, feeling like my legs might give out. "She took my name off the building my grandfather bought," I said, more to myself than to him. "She replaced me." Daniel didn't correct me. A door opened briefly down the hall and a rush of laughter spilled out. Then the door closed again. Somewhere inside, glass clinked. Someone cheered at a high bid. My life was being auctioned off in slow motion. "Why?" I asked, and my voice cracked on the word. Daniel looked at me carefully. "Because Madison makes sense to her." Justin. That sentence felt like a knife because it was so simple. To my mother, Madison was useful in the way she valued. Good in photos, good with donors, good at saying the right things at the right time. Madison was the kind of daughter she could showcase. I was the kind of daughter she could quietly hide without anyone noticing. I closed my eyes for a second. In my head, I saw my mother's face at my college graduation, smiling, but distracted, already looking past me. I saw her at my wedding giving a toast that said I was reliable, and Daniel was nice. Then sitting down like she'd completed an obligation. I opened my eyes. "I want to see it," I said. Daniel blinked. "See what?" "The paperwork," I said. "I don't want to guess. I don't want to interpret." Daniel's expression shifted. He seemed to weigh something. Then, he nodded once. "Okay," he said, "but not in the hallway. And not right now." "Why not now?" I demanded. "Because," he didn't say, "we're in public." "Because," he didn't say, "she's watching." "Because," he didn't say, "tonight is staged." Instead, he said, "Because you need to be ready for what's coming." My throat tightened again. "What's coming?" Daniel took his phone out again. He didn't open it fully. He just looked at the lock screen, then slid it back into his pocket. "They're going to introduce Madison as the new face of the foundation," he said, "and they're going to tie it to a state partnership." My stomach dropped. "A state partnership?" "Yes," Daniel said. "That's the big win. That's what the donors are here for. And if it's what I think it is, it's not just optics. It's money. It's contracts. It's power." I stared at him. "Emily understands stakes," he had said to my mother. Now I did. My job wasn't glamorous, but it taught you what people hid behind polished words. People hid violations behind charity. People hid conflicts behind committees. People hid personal enrichment behind mission statements. If my mother had tied the foundation to state funding while quietly transferring a major asset into Madison's control, that wasn't just a family betrayal. That was something else. "That's illegal," I whispered. Daniel's voice stayed steady. "Not necessarily illegal," he said. "Not without proof, but suspicious. And when something is suspicious, it invites questions." I stared at him. "Are you saying you're going to expose her?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He looked at me. Really looked. Like he was checking whether I was still the woman who wanted to keep peace at any cost, or whether something in me had shifted. Then he said, quietly, "I'm saying I won't let her do this to you. And keep calling it legacy." My eyes stung. Not tears yet, but that burning pressure right behind them. From inside the ballroom, applause swelled again. The auctioneer's voice rose, excited. "Another item sold." Daniel turned his head slightly, listening. "They're about to move into the future segment," he said. "That's usually where they announce leadership changes." I swallowed hard. Daniel's answer was simple. "We go back in," he said, "and we watch carefully." I stared at him. "Watch." "Yes," he said, "because whatever she announces is going to tell us exactly how far she's willing to go." We walked back toward the ballroom doors. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might show through my dress. My palms were slick. I wiped them against my skirt, then immediately regretted it, because the fabric was expensive, and I didn't want to look messy. That thought made me angry, that my brain was still trying to manage appearances while my mother was rewriting my life. Daniel pushed the doors open. Warm light spilled out. The room was still full, still gleaming, still perfectly arranged. The quartet played a soft transition piece. People turned back toward the stage as if on cue. My mother sat at the center table again, her face composed. Madison leaned close to her, whispering. Richard smiled, like nothing in the world could touch him. I stood near the side again, close to the podium, and looked up at the banner with the building photo. The names on the plaque sat there like a quiet verdict, and I understood something with a sick clarity. This wasn't just about where I sat tonight. This was about where I was allowed to exist in my mother's world from now on. The auction wrapped up with the kind of cheerful urgency that makes people feel generous and important at the same time. A weekend in Napa sold for more than my car was worth. A private chef dinner went to a couple who clapped for themselves afterward. Every time the auctioneer shouted, "Sold," the room applauded, like we were all part of something noble and clean. I stood near the side of the stage and watched the donors settle back into their seats, smoothing napkins on their laps, adjusting cufflinks, leaning in to whisper about numbers. My mother rose again, as if her body knew the timing by instinct. She approached the podium, took the microphone, and smiled like a person who had never lost control of a room in her life. "Thank you," Linda said, her voice warm. "That generosity is exactly why we're able to do what we do." Jested Vi. The lights dimmed slightly again, the kind of subtle shift that makes everyone face forward. Servers moved to the walls. People lifted their phones, already anticipating the announcement. The banner behind my mother glowed softly under the stage lights, the photo of the brownstone looking almost romantic, like a symbol instead of a piece of property with a deed and a filing history. Linda spoke about the foundation's mission. She spoke about children, families, access, equity, all the right words in the right order, and I knew she believed them, in a way. She believed in helping. She just believed in helping through a mirror, through optics, through being seen as the person who helps. Then she paused, and I recognized the pause. It was the same one she used when she was about to deliver news that she expected to be praised for. "Tonight," she said, "is not only about celebrating where we've been, it's about announcing where we're going." A murmur moved through the room. Heads lifted. Bodies leaned forward. "We are proud," she continued, "to share that the Carter Hale Foundation has been selected as a partner in a new statewide initiative focused on community health access and family services." Applause broke out instantly. People clapped like they'd been waiting for permission. Richard looked pleased, his smile widening in a way that made his face look almost sharp. Madison turned her head slightly, letting the room see her profile. My stomach tightened. Statewide initiative. They were a paper trail you could follow if you cared enough to look. Linda held up a hand to quiet the applause. "It's a competitive program," she said, "and we were chosen because of our proven track record and our ability to deliver." Axe. She made it sound like a prize, like a trophy, like something she'd earned simply by being impressive. Then she said, "We'll be coordinating with state agencies, local municipalities, and private sector partners to expand services into communities that need them most." My pulse quickened. I caught Daniel's eye. He was still beside me, still calm, but his gaze had sharpened. He wasn't watching my mother like a son-in-law listening to a speech. He was watching like someone listening for a specific line. Linda turned slightly, gesturing toward the front tables. "I want to thank our board for their guidance," she said. "And I want to recognize the people who made this possible." She thanked the senator again. She thanked a corporate sponsor. She thanked Richard. Then, her gaze shifted to Madison. "And now," she said, her voice lifting, "I want to introduce the person who will be leading our expansion strategy going forward." My throat tightened. The room was so quiet I could hear the faint hum of the projector above the stage. "Madison Hale," Linda announced, "will be stepping into the role of Director of Strategic Partnerships." Madison rose slowly, like she was standing in a spotlight. She smiled, waved, and the applause came again, louder this time. People turned toward her, some rising halfway out of their chairs to see better. Phones came up. I saw at least 3 people already recording. I felt the floor tilt slightly under my feet. Director of Strategic Partnerships. A role that sounded official, meaningful, powerful. A role that would put her at the center of the foundation's dealings with state agencies and corporate sponsors. Madison did not have a degree in public health. She did not have experience in program administration. She did not have a background in compliance. She had an Instagram account with tasteful photos of charity brunches and purpose-driven living captions. She had a talent for looking like she belonged. Linda let the applause continue for a few seconds, then leaned into the microphone again. "Madison has been instrumental in shaping our future," she said. She has a unique ability to connect people, build relationships, and create momentum. She understands that leadership is not about doing the same things the same way. It's about bold vision. Bold vision. My mother's favorite phrase when she was justifying something reckless. Madison sat back down, and Linda's eyes swept the room once more. And of course, she added with a light laugh, none of this would be possible without family. My heart lifted for half a second, involuntarily, like a reflex. That old part of me that still wanted to believe she would include me. That old part that still got hopeful when she used the word family. Linda smiled. My husband Richard, who has been a steady support, and Madison, who I'm so proud to call my daughter. Her daughter. She didn't say my name, not even as an afterthought, not even as Emily, who also helps. Nothing. It was like I wasn't in the room. A sound rose in my ears, a dull rushing, like blood. I stared at my mother's face, trying to find a flicker of hesitation, a sign that she realized what she was doing. But she looked smooth and confident, her eyes shining under the stage lights. Daniel's hand tightened slightly around mine, the first physical sign that he was affected. He didn't squeeze hard. He didn't pull me away. He just held on like he was anchoring me. The applause faded, and Linda's tone shifted into something more formal. One more thing, she said. As part of this initiative, we will be consolidating our assets and streamlining leadership to ensure accountability and efficiency. 8. I felt a coldness move through my stomach. Consolidating assets. Streamlining leadership. Those words had weight. Those words were legal. Those words belonged in documents. Linda turned and nodded to someone off stage. A man in a suit stepped forward, holding a folder, and the projector behind her clicked on. A slide appeared. A glossy rendering of the brownstone, now labeled as the Carter Hale Community Center. Underneath, in smaller text, was the caption, "Property ownership and stewardship will be overseen by the Hale Family Trust." The Hale Family Trust. Not Carter, not my grandfather's name, not the family legacy I'd been sold. I felt my breath catch. The air in my chest turned thin, like I couldn't pull enough oxygen no matter how hard I tried. Linda's voice kept moving, smooth as oil. The Hale Family Trust will ensure the building remains protected and properly managed as we expand. White. I stared at the words on the screen until they blurred. Hale Family Trust. That meant Richard. That meant Madison. That meant something irrevocable. I looked at the center table. Richard's smile was small and satisfied. Madison's posture was perfect. She looked like she'd been waiting for this exact slide to appear. My mother continued. This structure ensures our resources are stable, secure, and aligned with the Foundation's future. Aligned with the Foundation's future. Not mine. Daniel's voice was barely above a breath. That's it, he murmured. I turned my head toward him, my eyes wide. That's what? He didn't look at me. He was looking at the stage, at the slide, at the words. That means the transfer is complete, he said quietly. They're announcing it publicly. I felt my fingers go numb. I know, Daniel said. His jaw tightened. That's why this is happening now. Public announcements create pressure. They make it harder to undo. Hey, Linda smiled at the crowd again, then said, almost casually, and Madison will be our point of contact for all strategic decisions involving the center's expansion. My mouth went dry. This wasn't just my mother choosing Madison over me in a family way. This was my mother choosing Madison over me in a legal way, in a financial way, in a way that would outlive my mother's moods and my stepfather's charm. It was a decision that would stand, even if she later wanted to pretend she hadn't made it. Applause started again, but this time it sounded distant, like it was happening in another room. I could feel people around me shifting, whispering, reacting to the slide with impressed nods. Smart, someone said nearby. Good governance. Good governance. The phrase made my stomach turn. I saw a woman in a navy dress at the nearest table, lean toward her husband and whisper something while glancing in my direction. Her eyes flicked away quickly when I met them. Did they know who I was? Did they know I was the daughter who had been cut out? Or did they just see an unimportant woman standing near the podium? My throat burned. I wanted to walk up to the microphone and ask one simple question. When did you decide I didn't count? But I also knew the risk. The risk wasn't security dragging me out. The risk was my mother turning into a victim. The risk was her saying, Emily is emotional. and people believing it because they were already primed to see her as stable, and me as inconvenient. I lifted my chin and tried to keep my breathing even. Linda finished her remarks and thanked everyone again. The quartet began playing something brighter. The room loosened. Conversations resumed. Chairs shifted. Waiters moved in with fresh drinks. My mother stepped down from the stage and was immediately surrounded by donors. People shook her hand, hugged her, praised her. Richard joined her, smiling, accepting compliments, like he deserved them. Madison stood slightly behind, close enough to be included in photos, far enough to look humble. I watched all of it from the side and felt something settle into my bones. A quiet, heavy understanding. This was not an accident. This was not a misunderstanding. This was an intentional erasure, staged under soft lighting and polite applause. Daniel leaned in close. His voice was steady, but there was something colder in it now. "Emily," he said, "I need you to decide something." I turned to him, blinking hard. "Decide what? Whether you want to keep pretending this is just family drama," he said, "or whether you're ready to treat it like what it actually is." "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely working. Daniel's gaze stayed on my mother as she laughed with a donor, the kind of laugh she used when she was building something. "A play," he said quietly, "with money behind it. And paperwork." I swallowed hard. "And you have proof." Daniel didn't answer right away. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled his phone out. The screen lit up. All I saw were 3 words. "Documents verified. Ready." I get. My stomach dropped again, but this time it wasn't just fear. It was something else. It was the first sharp edge of clarity. Daniel looked at me. "I won't do anything unless you say so," he said. "But I need you to understand. If we do nothing, this becomes permanent." I stared at the stage, at the banner, at the brownstone photo with the names underneath it, and I felt the last fragile thread of my old belief snap. I wasn't watching my mother celebrate a new chapter. I was watching her close the door on me publicly, deliberately, and call it progress. For a few minutes after the announcement, I stayed where I was, near the side of the stage, pretending my legs still belonged to me. People drifted past with drinks in their hands, smiling and nodding, congratulating each other for being part of something that looked good from the outside. Every so often, someone glanced at me with a look that hovered between curiosity and dismissal, like they were trying to place who I was and deciding it didn't matter. Daniel didn't rush me. He stood close enough that I could feel the warmth of his arm through his jacket, steady and solid. That steadiness was the only thing keeping me upright. My chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a belt around my ribs and pulled. Every breath was shallow. I focused on small details to keep myself from spiraling the soft scratch of carpet under my shoes, the clink of ice in a glass as a server passed, the faint smell of citrus from someone's perfume. "You okay?" Daniel asked quietly. I nodded, even though I wasn't. Nodding was easier than explaining the way my thoughts were starting to scatter. Jumping from memory to memory, stacking evidence of a lifetime I had spent trying to earn something that was apparently never mine to begin with. I thought about the afternoon my mother sat across from me at a cafe and slid that folder across the table. I could still feel the smoothness of the paper under my fingers. I remembered how careful her voice had been, how generous she sounded when she said, "Someday, this will be yours too." I remembered going home that night and telling Daniel, with a kind of quiet pride, that my mother finally trusted me. Now I understood that trust had always been conditional, temporary, revocable. I watched my mother move through the room, greeting people, laughing easily. She looked lighter than she had in years, like she'd set something down and didn't plan to pick it back up. She didn't look at me once. A woman in a navy blazer approached her and shook her hand vigorously. I recognized her. She worked for the state, not in my department, but close enough that our paths had crossed at conferences and trainings. I watched as my mother leaned in, listening intently, nodding at the right moments. The sight sent a ripple of nausea through me. Daniel noticed. "Do you want to sit?" he asked. "There's nowhere to sit," I said. He glanced around. The empty chairs had already been claimed. The tables were full. The standing room near the walls was crowded now with people who didn't want to be part of the cluster around the center table but still wanted to be seen. "I don't want to sit," I added. "I don't want to disappear." Daniel's mouth pressed into a thin line. "Okay, there I dang die." We stood there together, watching as the night continued without me, like a play where my role had been cut after rehearsals. Eventually, Richard spotted me. His eyes flicked to Daniel, then back to me. He leaned over to my mother and said something in her ear. I saw the slight tightening at the corners of her mouth. Then she turned. She walked toward me with measured steps, the way she did when she wanted to appear calm and reasonable. She stopped a few feet away, her smile already in place. "Emily," she said. "Can we talk privately?" Her tone was firm, polite, leaving no room for refusal without consequences. Daniel looked at me. I nodded. "Fine." She led me toward the same hallway we'd stood in earlier, away from the noise and the eyes. The moment we were out of sight, her smile fell. "What is your problem tonight?" she asked. The bluntness of it stole my breath. "My problem?" I repeated. "Yes," she said. "You're standing there like a statue, making people uncomfortable. I was just erased from your foundation," I said. My voice shook despite my effort to keep it steady. "You took my name off the building. You gave Madison a leadership role she's not qualified for. And you didn't even warn me." Linda crossed her arms. "You're overreacting." That word again. Overreacting. It landed with a familiar weight. "This was a business decision," she continued. "Not a personal attack." As stayed. "You announced it at a gala," I said. "In front of hundreds of people. That's how these things are done," she snapped. "You don't understand how this world works." "I understand contracts," I said. "I understand compliance. I understand conflict of interest." Her eyes narrowed. "You work for the state," she said, as if that explained everything. The words stung more than I expected, not because they were clever, but because they revealed exactly how she saw me. Not as someone who contributed, but as someone who hovered at the edges, checking boxes, slowing things down. "I thought this was about family," I said quietly. Linda let out a short laugh. "That's your problem. You always think everything is about feelings, and you think nothing is," I said. "You didn't even tell me." "I didn't owe you an explanation," she said flatly. "The building needed to be protected. The foundation needed a clean structure. Madison understands growth. Madison understands branding," I said. "That's not the same thing." Linda's face hardened. "Don't be jealous." I stared at her, disbelief washing over me. "This isn't jealousy," I said. "This is betrayal." "Bung 2 PS. 2 PS, she scoffed. "You're being dramatic." I took a shaky breath. "You promised me." Her gaze flickered for a fraction of a second. "Not remorse. Calculation." I said things change, she said. "And they have. You should be happy for us." Us. Again. "And if I'm not?" I asked. Her eyes sharpened. "Then you should leave. You don't get to ruin this night." The words hung in the air between us. "You should leave." The same quiet exile, just spoken out loud this time. I felt something inside me crack, not loudly, not violently, but completely, like a bone breaking cleanly. I realized then that no amount of explaining, no amount of pleading, no perfect phrasing would change what had already been decided. My mother wasn't confused. She wasn't rushed. She wasn't mistaken. She was done with me in this context. I nodded slowly. "Okay," I said. She seemed surprised by how easily I said it. "Okay?" she repeated. "Yes," I said. "I'll leave." Her shoulders relaxed slightly, as if she'd won something. "Good. We'll talk later." I didn't respond. I turned and walked back toward the ballroom, my legs moving on their own. Daniel saw me coming and read my face immediately. "What did she say?" "She told me to leave," I said. His jaw tightened. "Do you want to?" I shook my head. "No. But I think I need to." He nodded once. "All right." We didn't rush. We didn't storm out. We walked through the room at a normal pace, passing tables, passing people who didn't know what had just happened, who only saw a couple leaving early. As we neared the doors, I heard my mother's laugh again, loud and bright, cutting through the noise. It followed me like an echo. Outside, the night air was cool and damp. The city hummed softly around us, traffic moving in the distance, lights reflecting off wet pavement. I leaned against the stone wall of the hotel and finally let myself breathe. The first tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. Then another. I wiped them away quickly, embarrassed even though no one was watching. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice breaking. I feel stupid. I really believed her. Daniel stepped closer, his hand warm against my back. You weren't stupid, he said. You were hopeful. That feels worse, I whispered. He didn't argue. We stood there for a moment, the weight of the night pressing down on me. My phone buzzed in my purse. I ignored it. I couldn't handle one more message, one more notification, one more reminder that my life was being rearranged without my consent. Daniel broke the silence. Emily, he said gently, I need to ask you something. I looked up at him, my eyes red, my head pounding. Do you want to let this stand? He asked. Or do you want to know exactly what they did? I swallowed hard. I want to know. He nodded. Then we need to go home. Raytree, why home? Because what I have isn't something I should show you on a sidewalk, he said. And because once you see it, you can't unsee it. And then, my chest tightened again. How bad is it? Daniel hesitated. Then he said, honestly, worse than just your name being taken off a building. I closed my eyes for a second. When I opened them, something had shifted. The shock was still there, the pain still sharp, but underneath it was a new, steadier feeling. Resolve. I'm done pretending, I said. Daniel nodded. Good. We walked to the car in silence. As he unlocked it, my phone buzzed again. This time, I looked. It was a text from my mother. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. I stared at the words, then locked the screen without replying. As Daniel pulled away from the curb, the hotel disappeared behind us, its lights shrinking in the rearview mirror. I rested my forehead against the cool glass of the window and watched the city slide by. Everything I thought I understood about my family had already collapsed inside that ballroom. What I didn't know yet was that the consequences of my mother's decision were about to spread far beyond our last name. The drive home felt longer than it was. Chicago lights slid past the passenger window in smeared reflections, and every red light felt personal, like the city was forcing me to sit inside the humiliation a few minutes longer. Daniel kept both hands on the wheel, steady, not speeding, not braking hard. He drove the way he always drove when something serious was happening, careful, controlled. Like if he stayed precise enough, the world wouldn't fall apart any faster than it already was. I watched his profile in the dim dashboard glow. His face looked calm, but his jaw stayed set. When he got quiet like this, it meant he was holding something back on purpose. My phone buzzed twice more in my purse. I didn't check it. I already knew what it would be. My mother using soft words to apply pressure. A reminder that her comfort mattered more than my reality. A suggestion that if I would just swallow it, everything could be fine. Note: Daniel pulled into our apartment complex in Oak Park, parked in our usual spot under the flickering light, and shut the engine off. The silence that followed was heavy. For a second, neither of us moved. You sure you want to see it? He asked. Yes, I said immediately. My voice sounded steadier than I felt. I want facts. He nodded once, like he'd been waiting for that exact answer. We went upstairs. Our place was small, familiar, and quiet, and the normality of it hit me hard. The stack of mail on the counter, the dish towel hanging crooked on the oven handle, the little scuff on the wall near the hallway where I'd bumped a grocery bag weeks ago. These ordinary details made the gala feel like a fever dream. Daniel didn't offer me tea or tell me to sit down. He walked straight to his desk in the corner of the living room, the one he used for work, and opened his laptop. I stood behind him, still in my dress, my shoes still on, my hands cold. My heart was beating hard again, but it wasn't just from fear now. It was from anticipation. The sick kind. The kind you feel when you already know something is going to hurt, and you need to see it anyway. Daniel typed in silence. His screen reflected faintly in the dark window. I watched his fingers move quickly, familiar with shortcuts, with folders, with whatever system he used to keep his life organized. What am I about to see? I asked. Daniel paused. Public records, he said. Contract attachments. And a couple things that aren't exactly public, but they're not hidden either, if you know where to look. That made my stomach tighten. Daniel. He glanced up at me. You asked for facts. I swallowed. Okay. He clicked into a file and turned the laptop slightly so I could see. A PDF filled the screen. The title was in bold, official-looking text. Cook County, Recorder of Deeds. Property transfer document. My eyes locked onto the address immediately. The brownstone. My grandfather's building. My grandfather's building. Under grantor. My mother's name. Under grantee. A name I didn't recognize at first. Hale Stewardship Holdings, LLC. My throat tightened. That's Richard, Daniel said. Or Madison. Or both. LLCs can be layered, but this one traces back to Richard's business manager. I stared at the document until the words blurred. I blinked hard and forced my focus back. What about the half share? I asked. Though I already knew, Daniel scrolled. There isn't one, he said. Not anymore. He clicked to another page. Another attachment. A trust document. Hale Family Trust. The trustee names listed. Richard Hale. Linda Carter Hale. Madison Hale. No Emily. I felt a sharp ache behind my eyes, like pressure building. Daniel highlighted a date line with his cursor. 6 months. I thought about Thanksgiving at my mother's condo. She'd hugged me, held me close for a photo, told Daniel he looked healthy. Madison had taken selfies near the window. Richard had poured expensive wine. My mother had talked about expanding the mission and how proud she was of the foundation, all while the paperwork had already been done. I let out a breath that sounded like a laugh but wasn't. She looked me in the eye for 6 months, I said, and didn't tell me. I goad. Daniel didn't respond. He let the silence sit, letting the truth land fully. I leaned closer to the screen. So she didn't just change seating, I said. Yes, Daniel said simply. My hand started shaking again. I grabbed the back of a chair to steady myself. Why would she do this now? I asked. Why announce it tonight? Daniel clicked to another file. Because of this, he said. A new PDF opened. It had a state letterhead at the top. Illinois Department of Human Services. My stomach dropped so hard, it felt like it pulled the air with it. Daniel scrolled. And I saw the words, Partnership Agreement, Service Expansion, Funding Allocation, and then a paragraph that made my skin prickle. This partnership was contingent on governance structure, transparency, and asset stewardship. Read the section about oversight, Daniel said quietly. I read. My eyes moved over the words, translating them the way my brain always did at work. Conditions, reporting, conflicts, disclosure requirements, audit rights. Then I saw it. A clause about related party transactions and asset transfers. I swallowed. They can, Daniel said, but it triggers scrutiny, especially if they're consolidating assets into a family trust while accepting state-linked funding. It's not automatically illegal, but it's exactly the kind of thing that gets reviewed. I stared at the clause. My mouth went dry. She did this, I whispered. And then she put Madison in charge of partnerships. Daniel nodded. That part is what's dangerous. I turned to him. Because Madison will talk too much? No, he said. Because Madison will sign things she doesn't understand. The words hit like a slow realization. Madison's confidence wasn't just irritating. It was a liability. A liability that could become someone else's problem if the foundation moved into state contracts and government oversight. I looked back at the screen. This is real, I said. This isn't just family betrayal. 1. Daniel's face stayed calm, but his eyes were hard now. It stopped being just family when your mother decided to tie it to public money and public trust. I swallowed again. And what's the worst case? Daniel's gaze dropped briefly to the keyboard, then back up to me. Worst case is an investigation, he said. Frozen funds? Donors pulling out? Board members resigning? Headlines. The kind of mess your mom can't talk her way out of. My heart pounded. And you know this because of your job? Daniel hesitated. It was a small hesitation, but after tonight, I trusted nothing small. Daniel, I said. He exhaled slowly. I know it because I've seen how these partnerships get audited, he said. I've seen what triggers flags, and I've seen what happens when people think nonprofits are personal piggy banks. I stared at him. Have you dealt with this before? Yes, he said. The answer was too quick, too practiced. I felt my stomach tighten. What exactly do you do? I asked, and my voice came out sharper than I meant. Daniel didn't flinch. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he reached for his phone on the desk and flipped it over. The screen lit up with a notification preview. A message from an unknown number. Need your green light. We can initiate contact tonight. I stared at it. My pulse spiked. "Who is that?" I asked. Daniel locked the screen without answering. "Someone who can help," he said. My throat tightened. "With making sure your mother doesn't get to rewrite reality and call it good governance," he said. Still calm, but his words were heavier now. I stepped back slightly. "Are you already involved in this?" I asked. Daniel shook his head. "Not officially," he said. "Not yet." "Not yet," I repeated. He stood up from the desk and faced me fully. "Emily," he said, and his voice softened. "I didn't plan tonight. I didn't want tonight. I hoped I was wrong about what they were doing. But you weren't," I said. "No," he admitted. "I wasn't." I felt my chest tighten again, but this time it was mixed with something else, anger. Not just at my mother, but at the way I had been kept in the dark by everyone. At the way my life had been treated like a piece on someone else's board. "What else is there?" I asked. "Because you said it was worse than my name being taken off a building." Daniel looked at the laptop, then back at me. "There's more," he said. "And it's not just the property. It's how they did it." He clicked into another folder. A set of emails appeared, subject lines visible. Vendor communications, board notes, something labeled asset consolidation strategy. I stared at the screen. "Where did you get those?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. He just said, "Look at the date." I looked. The email thread was from last summer. Madison's name was on it. So was Richard's attorney. So was my mother. And the phrase, "remove unnecessary stakeholders," sat in the body of one email, like it belonged there, like it was normal. My stomach lurched. "Unnecessary stakeholders," I whispered. Daniel's voice was low. "That's you," he said. I felt like the room tilted. I grabbed the chair again, my fingers digging into the wood. For a second, I couldn't speak. My mind flashed through scenes: my mother hugging me, telling me to come to the gala, smiling at me in the hallway before she told me to leave. All of it reframed now as management. Damage control, a plan that had been in motion long before I walked into that ballroom. I looked at Daniel. "So, what do we do?" I asked, and my voice sounded strange, like it belonged to someone older. Daniel's eyes didn't leave mine. "We decide how much truth you want to bring into the light," he said. "Because once we start, there's no going back." I swallowed hard. "I don't want revenge," I said automatically. The old reflex. To be the good one. The reasonable one. Daniel didn't smile. He just nodded, like he respected the instinct. "Good," he said. "This isn't revenge." He glanced at his phone again, then back at me. "And your mother has been acting like she's exempt from them." My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my fingertips. I stared at the email on the screen, at the words that reduced me to an obstacle. Then I looked up at Daniel and said the thing that felt like stepping off a ledge. "Okay," I said. "Show me everything." And as Daniel sat back down and opened the next file, I realized my mother hadn't just taken my place at her gala. She had signed papers that were about to pull her entire world down with them. Daniel didn't dump everything on me at once. He moved through it like he was walking me across thin ice, one careful step at a time, making sure I understood what I was looking at before he showed me the next thing. The emails weren't dramatic by themselves. No one wrote, "Let's ruin Emily," in all caps. It was worse than that. It was professional, polite, strategic. The thread labeled Asset Consolidation Strategy started with Richard's attorney outlining a timeline. Transfer the brownstone into the Hale Family Trust. Update foundation bylaws to reflect streamlined governance. Announce leadership changes at the gala to lock in stakeholder perception. Madison replied with a thumbs-up emoji in one message, like they were coordinating a brunch reservation. My mother's responses were the ones that made me feel sick. She didn't argue. She didn't ask if it was fair. She asked questions like, "Will this create any appearance issues? And how do we manage Emily's reaction?" Not whether she deserved to react, just how to manage it. There was a document attached to one email with a clean title, Talking Points. It was bullet points, meant for board members if anyone asked questions. It listed phrases like family alignment, succession planning, asset protection, and best practices. "It's not next." My name appeared only once, in a sentence that made my throat tighten. Emily Carter will remain a valued supporter of the foundation, though she is not involved in strategic decision-making. Valued supporter. I stared at the line until my eyes hurt. Daniel watched me carefully. What thing? I asked, though I already knew. You're trying to make it make sense, he said. You're trying to find a version where this is accidental. I swallowed hard. I just can't believe she wrote that. Daniel's voice stayed calm. Believe it, he said. She chose it. My chest tightened again. That belt around the ribs feeling. I pressed a hand against my sternum, as if I could physically hold myself together. Okay, I said, forcing the word out. So there's the property transfer, there's the trust, there's the emails. What else? Daniel clicked into a folder labeled Partnership. He opened a spreadsheet, then a PDF, then another email thread. The language shifted from family strategy to procurement and compliance. He pointed at one line item in the spreadsheet. This is the contract manager they listed for the state partnership, he said. I leaned in. The name made my stomach drop. Madison Hale. Why would they do that? I asked, my voice sharp. She's not qualified. Daniel's face didn't change. Because she's controllable, he said. And because your mom thinks the rules are flexible if you sound confident. I stared at the spreadsheet. It listed deliverables, reporting deadlines, performance metrics. These weren't vague goals. These were measurable requirements tied to funding. They're going to fail, I whispered. Daniel nodded. Or they're going to cut corners, he said. Which is worse? I ran my hands through my hair, suddenly overwhelmed by how many layers there were. So, what's the trigger? I asked. What makes this blow up? Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair. There are a few, he said. But there's one big one. He opened another PDF. It was the partnership agreement again. But this time, he scrolled to a different section and highlighted it. Read this part, he said. I read. My eyes tracked the dense paragraph, translating it into what it actually meant. The state retained the right to conduct an independent audit. The foundation was required to disclose related party transactions. Asset transfers involving board members or their families had to be reported. Any failure to disclose could be grounds for immediate suspension and clawback of funds. Clawback. The word thudded in my mind. Money returned. Grants revoked. Public embarrassment. I looked up at Daniel. They didn't disclose the trust transfer, I said. And it wasn't a question. Daniel's eyes held mine. Not that I've seen, he said. And if they think they can hide it, they're wrong. Because property records are public, and because donors talk, and because someone in the room tonight is going to ask questions. Someone in the room tonight. My stomach tightened again. Who? Daniel hesitated, then said carefully. A state liaison was there. A couple, actually. I pictured the woman in the navy blazer shaking my mother's hand. My skin prickled. I know her, I said quietly. Not well, but I've met her. Daniel nodded. She's assigned to monitor partnerships like this, he said. And she doesn't like surprises. I stared at the laptop screen, at the highlighted clause, and my mind began to organize itself the way it always did in a crisis. Not with emotion, but with sequence. Cause and effect. My mother wanted prestige. She wanted public money without public scrutiny. She wanted control of the building while claiming it was community-driven. She wanted Madison in power because Madison would never challenge her. And she wanted me quiet because I was the one person in her orbit who actually understood what oversight meant. Daniel closed the laptop halfway, not shutting it completely, like he wanted to shift the conversation from documents to decisions. Emily, he said, I need to be very clear. If we do nothing, you lose your place permanently. If we do something careless, it turns into a mess, and your mom will still make herself the victim. I stared at him. So what's the right thing? I asked. Daniel's jaw tightened again. The right thing is to let the system do what it's designed to do, he said. But to make sure the system actually sees what's happening. A chill moved through me. You mean report them? Daniel didn't flinch. I mean ensure the relevant people have the relevant information, he said. I looked away, toward our kitchen, toward the quiet normality of our apartment. My mother's voice echoed in my mind. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. Harder than it needs to be. Like truth was an inconvenience. I'm not trying to destroy her, I said quietly. Daniel's voice softened. You're not destroying her, he said. You're stopping her from doing what she's already doing. I turned back to him. And what about the building? I asked. Is there any way to undo that? Daniel opened the laptop again and pulled up the deed transfer. He pointed to a signature line. Your mother signed, he said. So legally. She consented. But that doesn't mean it's untouchable. How? I asked. He clicked to a different file, then another. One is governance. If the board determines there was a conflict of interest or misconduct, they can challenge the transfer as not aligned with the foundation's mission. The other angle is your grandfather's estate documentation. My heart jumped. My grandfather's estate? Daniel nodded. You told me your grandfather had intentions, he said, that he wanted the building to serve the community. Yes, I said. He said it 100 times. Daniel's eyes were steady. Intentions don't matter unless they're written, he said. But sometimes they are. I frowned. I never saw a will. You might not have, Daniel said. But if there was a restriction, a condition, a clause tied to the original transfer to the foundation, that changes things. My pulse quickened. How would we find out? Daniel stood up and walked to a drawer in his desk. He opened it and pulled out a thin file folder I'd never seen before. It wasn't labeled. He placed it on the desk in front of me. I stared at it. Daniel's voice stayed calm. Something I requested copies of months ago, he said, because I didn't like what I was seeing. My skin prickled. Requested from where? From the Foundation's public filings and historical records, he said. And from an attorney who handled some of your grandfather's paperwork. I didn't have to sneak. I just had to ask the right way. I opened the folder with trembling fingers. Inside were photocopies of older documents, board minutes, property use statements, a donation agreement signed years ago. One page had a heading in bold. Restricted gift agreement. My breath caught. I scanned quickly, my eyes snagging on key phrases. Property use restricted to community benefit. Asset may not be transferred to private entities. Violation triggers reversion clause. Reversion clause. I looked up at Daniel, my mouth dry. It means your mom may have violated the original agreement by transferring it into a family trust, Daniel said. If that clause is enforceable, Disn't. My hands shook so hard the paper fluttered. Why didn't she check this? I whispered. Daniel's eyes were cold now. Because she assumed no one would, he said. I stared down at the document, at my grandfather's old signature, and a wave of emotion hit me so suddenly, I had to sit down. I sat hard on the chair, the paper trembling in my hands. This wasn't just my name. This wasn't just my pride. This was my grandfather's intention, turned into a trophy. This was a building meant for community, turned into a family asset. I looked up at Daniel. Daniel's answer came without hesitation. We put it in front of someone who can act, he said. I swallowed hard. Who? Daniel reached for his phone and unlocked it. His thumb hovered over a message thread. He looked at me first, not the screen. This is the point of no return, he said. If we move forward, your mother won't forgive you. I do. The old Emily, the one who still wanted approval, the one who still hoped for a version of her mother that didn't exist, tried to rise up in me and protest. But then I remembered the gala, the place card behind the podium, the slide with the Hale Family Trust, the email calling me an unnecessary stakeholder. I felt something harden in my chest. I don't need her forgiveness, I said. Daniel's gaze held mine. Then he nodded once. Okay, he said. Then we do this cleanly. If MD blurred. He tapped the screen and typed a short reply. Proceed. Tomorrow morning. And in the quiet of our living room, with my grandfather's signature trembling in my hands, I understood that the gala wasn't the end of my humiliation. It was the beginning of my mother's consequences. I didn't sleep. I lay in bed beside Daniel and stared at the ceiling while the room stayed dark and still. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the slide on the screen at the gala. Hale Family Trust. I saw my mother's smile. I heard her voice saying, "Don't embarrass us." And underneath those images, like a second soundtrack, I kept hearing the words from the email. Remove unnecessary stakeholders. Around 2:30 a.m., I got up quietly and went to the kitchen. I drank water straight from the glass like it could rinse something bitter out of my throat. My hands were still shaky, Not from cold, but from the constant adrenaline that wouldn't stop cycling through my body. Daniel came in a few minutes later, barefoot, wearing sweatpants, his hair slightly mussed. "You okay?" he asked softly. I shrugged. "No," I said, "but I'm not backing out." He nodded, as if he'd expected that answer. He opened his laptop again at the kitchen table, the same way he had the night before, efficient and calm. I sat across from him, wrapping my fingers around my mug even though it was empty, just to have something to hold. "Who are you contacting?" I asked, because I couldn't hold the question in anymore. Daniel didn't look up. "A compliance attorney and an investigator," he said. "People who handle nonprofit governance issues and state partnership risk." My heart thudded. "Like, law enforcement?" "No," he said immediately. "Not like that. This isn't a raid. This is a process." "Process," I repeated, my voice flat. Daniel finally met my eyes. "Emily, I'm not going to do anything reckless," he said. "If your mom is violating a restricted gift agreement and taking public funds while consolidating assets into a family trust, the board and the state will want to know. That's not revenge. That's oversight." I swallowed hard. "And if she isn't violating anything?" Daniel's voice stayed steady. "Then nothing happens," he said. "And you still have clarity." "Cible." Daniel's voice stayed steady. That word again. Clarity. It sounded like the only thing I could actually trust. My phone buzzed on the table. I glanced at it. My mother. I stared at the screen for a long second, then silenced it. Daniel watched me do it, and I saw something like approval flicker across his face. At 7:15 a.m., he told me to get dressed. Not dressed up. Normal. Jeans. A sweater. Comfortable shoes. The practical part of my brain registered the instruction as if we were preparing for a field visit. "Where are we going?" I asked. "Not far," Daniel said. "And not to your mother's." The words should have reassured me, but they made my stomach tighten anyway. I was still living in the emotional logic of my mother's world, where any resistance was automatically a confrontation. We drove to a quiet office park near downtown Chicago, the kind of building with frosted glass doors and neutral carpeting. The sign in the lobby listed half a dozen small firms and consultancies. Daniel checked in at the desk with a name I didn't recognize. The receptionist nodded like she'd been expecting us. The waiting area smelled faintly of coffee and printer toner. There were 2 framed motivational quotes on the wall that made me want to laugh. Not because they were funny, but because they felt absurdly normal for what we were doing. A woman in her 40s stepped out and called Daniel's name. "Mr. Carter?" Daniel stood. "That's us," he said, then looked at me. "Ready?" I nodded, though my stomach felt like it was full of rocks. We followed her into a small conference room. She introduced herself as Angela Monroe, compliance attorney. Her handshake was firm, her tone calm. She didn't seem impressed by anyone. She seemed like a person who had seen too many people try to explain their way out of paper trails. Daniel handed her a thin packet of documents. The restricted gift agreement was on top. Angela skimmed the pages quickly, her eyes moving with a speed that made me feel both reassured and exposed. "This is a restricted gift," she said, tapping the page lightly. "If it's valid and enforceable, transferring the property into a private family trust would be a violation." My throat tightened. "So they can't do that?" I asked. "They can do it," she said. "People do things they're not allowed to do all the time. The question is what happens after." Daniel stayed quiet. He let her talk. Angela slid another page forward. "You also have an asset stewardship clause tied to community use," she said. "And this reversion language is interesting." End quote. She looked up at me. "Are you aware of any original donor conditions besides this?" I shook my head. "I didn't even know this existed," I admitted. My voice sounded small in the room. Angela nodded, unfazed. "That's common," she said. "Restrictions are inconvenient, so people treat them like background noise." Daniel's jaw tightened slightly at that, but he didn't interrupt. Angela placed the packet down and folded her hands. "Here's what I can tell you," she said. "If the foundation announced last night that the property is now under the Hale Family Trust, and the trust is controlled by board-adjacent parties, that raises multiple governance red flags. If they are also entering a state partnership, it raises additional disclosure obligations." My heart pounded. "What happens next?" I asked. Angela leaned back slightly. Next depends on what you want, she said. Not emotionally, practically. Do you want to regain control of the property? Do you want to protect the restricted gifts intent? Do you want to report governance concerns to the state liaison? Do you want to notify the board? The board. The people who had sat at those front tables, applauding. The people who had nodded at my mother's speech like it was all wise and clean. I felt my face heat. The board is her friends, I said. They won't listen to me. Angela's expression didn't change. They may not listen to you, she said. Daniel finally spoke. We also have emails, he said calmly. Strategy emails about consolidating the asset and managing Emily's reaction. Angela held out her hand. Let me see. Daniel slid over printed copies. I watched Angela read the phrase unnecessary stakeholder without any visible reaction, but her eyes sharpened slightly. That's not a phrase you want in writing, she said, almost to herself. I felt a weird sensation in my chest. A mix of vindication and grief. Vindication because it was real. Grief because it had been real all along. Angela looked up. Who wrote these? She asked. Daniel pointed. Angela nodded slowly. Okay, she said. This moves from messy to actionable. She leaned forward. Here's what I recommend, she said. First, we document everything. Second, we notify the board's independent members. Third, we notify the state partnership liaison, because state funds and partnerships require transparency and disclosure. If there's a violation, they will suspend pending review. The word suspend made my stomach flip. Daniel nodded, still calm. And the property? He asked. Angela tapped the restricted gift agreement again. If the reversion clause is enforceable, there are legal remedies, she said. At minimum, it gives leverage. At maximum, it forces the foundation to unwind the transfer or risk losing the asset entirely. I stared at the document as if it could speak. Angela turned to me. Emily, she said, and her tone softened slightly. I want you to understand something. None of this requires you to do anything loud. You don't have to confront anyone at a gala. You don't have to argue in a hallway. You let the documents speak. My throat tightened. My mother will say I'm attacking her, I whispered. Angela's gaze stayed steady. She can say whatever she wants, she said. But she cannot change signatures. That sentence landed in me like a small relief. Not because it made me feel powerful, but because it made me feel anchored. Signatures were real. Filings were real. Words and emails were real. Daniel's phone buzzed on the table. He glanced at it once, then put it face down again. Angela noticed. You have support, she said. Daniel didn't respond. Angela slid a business card toward me. If you want to proceed, she said, we can send a formal notice to the board and the state liaison by end of day. I stared at the card. My fingers hovered over it like it was hot. This was the moment the night before had been leading to. The point where my pain turned into action. The point where I could no longer pretend this was private. I thought of my mother's text. Please don't make this harder than it needs to be. I thought of the gala slide. The Hale family trust. I thought of being told to leave. Then I remembered the way my grandfather used to unlock the brownstone door and let people in without asking who they were. The building wasn't meant to be a trophy. It was meant to be a place. I took the card. Yes, I said, my voice steadier now. Proceed. Angela nodded once, like she respected the clarity. Okay, she said. Then we proceed. 8. We left the office, and the moment we stepped outside, the cold air hit my face and made me blink hard. The city moved around us as if nothing had happened. People carried coffee cups. Cars honked. A man in a suit walked past, talking into a headset. Daniel opened the car door for me. I sat down, and for a second, I just stared straight ahead. What now? I asked quietly. Daniel started the engine. Now, he said. We wait for them to realize the world doesn't bend just because they want it to. My phone buzzed again. I glanced at it before I could stop myself. Another message from my mother. We need to talk. Madison is upset. This isn't how family acts. I stared at the words until they blurred. Daniel glanced over. You don't have to answer that, he said. I swallowed hard. She still thinks she's in control, I said. Daniel's voice was calm. She thinks that because no one has ever made her pay, he said. That's about to change. And as we pulled away from the curb, my stomach tightened again, not with fear this time, but with the heavy certainty that the next time my mother called it family, the system would call it something else. By lunchtime, the first crack appeared. It wasn't a phone call. It wasn't a headline. It was a single email that came to my work inbox with a subject line so plain it almost looked harmless. Request for clarification. Carter Hale Foundation Partnership. I stared at it for a long second, my hands hovering over the keyboard. At work, I lived inside emails like this. They were the beginning of audits, the beginning of suspensions, the beginning of people suddenly remembering that rules existed. I opened it. The message was from a state liaison I recognized by name, copied to 2 other addresses and a general program inbox. The tone was professional and neutral, which was exactly what made it dangerous. It referenced the Foundation's public announcement and requested documentation related to asset, stewardship, and governance structure, specifically the ownership and management of the brownstone property tied to service delivery. They asked for updated disclosures, board meeting minutes authorizing the asset transfer, and confirmation of compliance with restricted gift conditions. Restricted gift conditions. My stomach tightened, but I felt something steadier underneath. It was not joy. It was not satisfaction. It was the quiet certainty that the world was finally responding to paper the way paper demanded. Daniel texted me 2 minutes later. They received the notice. This is the first wave. I didn't reply. I just sat in my office chair and stared at the email, hearing the faint hum of the overhead lights, the soft clack of keyboards around me, the normal sound of a workday continuing, while my mother's glossy world began to fracture. I thought about the gala again, the applause, the slide. The way she'd smiled like she was invincible. Now a state liaison was asking for minutes. Minutes were where lies went to die. I forwarded the email to Daniel with one line. It started. His reply came immediately. Stay calm. Don't contact your mom. Let her move first. I knew why he said that. If I called her, she'd twist it into, Emily is threatening us, and she'd focus on emotions instead of documents. If I stayed silent, she'd be forced to respond to the actual questions. I tried to work that afternoon, but my attention kept splintering. Every time I looked at my calendar, I felt the pressure in my chest return. Every time my phone buzzed, my stomach dropped. At 3:17 p.m., my mother called. I let it ring. I watched her name flash across the screen until it stopped. 2 minutes later, a text arrived. Are you behind this? I stared at the words. I could hear her voice in them, sharp and indignant. The assumption that the system only moved when someone pushed it. The belief that consequences required a villain. I didn't answer. Another text came. Emily, you need to call me now. I still didn't answer. At 4:05 p.m., Madison called. I didn't answer. A voicemail notification popped up. I didn't listen to it. I didn't want her voice in my ear, dripping with outrage and disbelief that someone like me could disrupt someone like her. I drove home with my hands clenched on the wheel so hard my fingers hurt. The sky was gray and low, the kind of Chicago winter afternoon that made everything feel dim. When I pulled into our parking spot, Daniel's car was already there. He met me at the door before I could even take my coat off. It's moving fast, he said quietly. What happened? I asked. He led me to the living room and opened his laptop on the coffee table. A new email thread was on the screen, this one from Angela Monroe, the attorney. She'd copied Daniel and included me. State liaison has acknowledged receipt, the email said. Foundation has 48 hours to produce requested documentation. Board members have been contacted. One independent member requested emergency meeting. Emergency meeting. Daniel looked up at me. Your mom is going to panic, he said. I swallowed hard. She already is. As if to prove it, my phone buzzed again. Another text from my mother. If you do this, you will destroy everything I've built. I stared at the screen, my hands shaking. Daniel watched me. Don't respond, he said again. I know, I whispered. But the message hit in a place that was hard to ignore. Destroy everything I've built. It wasn't about me. It wasn't about family. It was about her identity, her image, her reputation, her narrative. Everything she'd built included a version of me that stayed quiet. I set my phone down and pressed the heels of my hands into my eyes. Daniel's voice softened. Emily, he said, listen. The reason she's saying you'll destroy everything is because she knows she built it on assumptions. She assumed no one would care about the trust transfer. She assumed you'd swallow the humiliation like you always have. My throat tightened. I did swallow a lot. Daniel nodded. Not anymore. Too braided. We ate dinner without tasting it. Around 7:30 p.m., the first email from the foundation hit my work inbox again, this time forwarded by someone higher up. The foundation was requesting an extension. I read the message twice, my pulse quickening. They claimed administrative delays. They claimed the documents were in process. They claimed the transfer was routine. Routine transfers don't require extensions. Routine transfers don't require emergency meetings. Daniel saw my face and leaned closer. For what? I asked. Daniel's answer was blunt. To get their story straight, he said. To delete emails. To pressure board members. To spin it as a misunderstanding. And to blame you. My stomach turned. They can try, Daniel said. But if we already have them, and if the state requested records, deleting becomes its own problem. I swallowed hard. So what happens next? Daniel looked down at his phone, then back at me. Next, he said, your mom will try to control you. He was right. At 8:12 p.m., my mother showed up, not at our apartment door, at the building entrance downstairs. The intercom buzzed. I looked at the screen and saw her standing there, her hair pulled back, her coat expensive, her posture rigid. She looked like she'd stepped out of a board meeting and into a confrontation she didn't believe she should have to endure. Daniel's eyes narrowed. Don't let her in, he said, but my body moved before my brain finished arguing. I went downstairs. Not because I wanted to comfort her, not because I wanted reconciliation, because I needed to see her face. I needed to know if she would look ashamed. When I opened the lobby door, she marched in like she owned the building. Emily, she snapped. What did you do? Her voice was low but furious, her eyes bright with anger. I stood a few feet away, keeping space between us. I didn't do anything, I said. She stared at me. Don't lie to me, she said. The state is asking for documents. The board is calling emergency meetings. People are asking questions. This started right after last night. I held her gaze. Maybe people are asking questions because you did something worth questioning, I said. Her face flushed. I protected the foundation, she hissed. I protected the building. You protected Richard and Madison, I said quietly. Her eyes flashed. You don't understand, she said. The same phrase from the hallway at the gala. You don't understand what it takes to keep something alive. Donors don't want chaos. They don't want scandal. They want stability. You mean they want the illusion, I said. Linda stepped closer. You don't do this to family. The hypocrisy landed hard. I thought of my place card behind the podium. I thought of her not saying my name. I thought of the email calling me an unnecessary stakeholder. You did it to me first, I said, and my voice was calm in a way that surprised even me. You just did it with a microphone and a smile. Linda's eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't expected me to say it out loud. For a second, she looked almost unsteady. Then her face hardened again. Call off whatever you started, she said. Right now. I almost laughed. The idea that I could call off a state liaison asking for board minutes. The idea that she still believed consequences were a switch she could flip off if she intimidated the right person. I can't, I said simply. Her eyes narrowed. Yes, you can, she insisted. You can tell them it was a misunderstanding. You can tell them you were emotional. You can tell them, I'm not going to lie, I said. Linda's mouth opened, then closed. She looked at me like she was seeing a stranger. You're doing this because you're hurt, she said, her voice lowering into something that sounded almost pitying. Because you were embarrassed. I felt my chest tighten, but I didn't look away. I'm doing this because you signed papers, I said. And now people are reading them. Linda's breath hitched. Emily, she said, and her voice changed. Softer. The old threat. The one that used to control me because I wanted her approval more than I wanted my own peace. I stared at her, feeling the weight of that sentence, and realized it didn't land the way it used to. I already lost you, I said quietly. Last night, her face twisted, anger and fear mixing together. "You're ungrateful," she hissed. "After everything I've done, I thought of the building. My grandfather's intention. The community meetings. The restricted gift agreement. What you did," I said, "was take." Linda's eyes flashed. "This is Daniel," she spat suddenly. "He put you up to this. He's poisoning you against me." I heard Daniel's footsteps behind me then. He'd come down, silent, standing in the lobby doorway like a steady shadow. "My wife doesn't need anyone to poison her," he said calmly. "She just finally read what you wrote." Linda's gaze snapped to him. "You," she said, "stay out of this." Daniel didn't move. "You brought it to our door," he said. Linda looked back at me, her breathing quick. "If you don't fix this," she said, "you will regret it." I believed she meant it. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of her regret. I was afraid of becoming her. And as she turned and stormed out of the lobby, her heels striking the floor like punctuation, I knew the next time she spoke to the board, she wouldn't be asking how to comply. She'd be asking how to survive. The emergency board meeting happened the next morning at 9 a.m., and I wasn't invited. Of course I wasn't. The foundation didn't see me as a stakeholder. They'd said it in writing, but I found out it was happening anyway because Angela emailed Daniel and me at 8:22 a.m. with a subject line that made my pulse jump. Board convening. Immediate response. I sat at my desk at work and stared at the email while coworkers walked past with coffee cups and small talk. The fluorescent lights above me felt harsher than usual. My heart kept thudding in my chest, as if I'd just sprinted upstairs, even though I hadn't moved. Daniel texted me at 8:58. They're in the room. 4 independent members present. State liaison dialed in. State liaison dialed in. That alone changed the power dynamic. My mother could charm donors. She could charm politicians at a gala. But she couldn't charm a recorded call where people asked for documents and deadlines. At 9:11, Daniel texted again. "Your mom is talking. She's framing it as family conflict." I could picture it. Linda leaning forward, hands folded, voice controlled, saying words like misunderstanding and emotional and personal matter. I could hear her saying my name in that careful, disappointed way she used when she wanted people to see me as the problem. At 9:26, another text. Board chair asked for the restricted gift agreement. Your mom said she's not aware of restrictions. I felt a cold jolt move through me. Not aware. The building's restriction had been in the foundation's records for years. My grandfather's gift agreement wasn't a rumor. It was a document. If she was claiming ignorance, she was lying. Or she'd never bothered to read what she'd inherited. At 9:42, Daniel called me. I didn't pick up immediately because I was at work, but my hands were shaking too much to pretend I could focus. I grabbed my phone and stepped into a small conference room down the hall, closing the door behind me. "Talk to me," I said. Daniel's voice was calm, but I could hear tension under it. "They're spiraling," he said. "What do you mean?" "I mean, Richard is talking over people," he said. "Madison is trying to explain what strategic partnerships means and it's not helping. And your mom is insisting the trust transfer was just asset protection." My throat tightened. "Did they show the deed?" "They did," Daniel said, "because the board pulled it themselves. Public records. It's already there." I closed my eyes. The image of my mother standing at the podium with that slide behind her came back. And I felt the same humiliation. But now it was mixed with something sharper. Not helplessness. Control. The control of truth being unavoidable. "What did the state liaison say?" I asked. Daniel exhaled quietly. "She asked for disclosures," he said. "Specifically, why the asset was moved into a private trust right before the partnership announcement, why the trust beneficiaries overlap with leadership appointments, and why the restricted gift agreement wasn't disclosed." I swallowed. "And my mother?" Daniel's voice went colder. "She said the restricted gift agreement is outdated and non-binding." My stomach flipped. "She can't just decide that." "No," Daniel said. "She can't." "I know." There was a pause on the line, and I heard faint voices in the background, muffled, like Daniel was standing near a hallway or doorway. Then he said, "Angela is about to speak." I held my breath. Daniel stayed silent for a moment, listening. Then he said quietly, "Okay, that's the pivot." "What pivot?" I whispered. Angela just informed the board that the restricted gift agreement contains a reversion clause, he said, and that transferring the asset into a private trust is likely a violation. She also recommended that board members seek independent counsel immediately. A pulse of cold ran through my body. So, the building could revert, I said. Yes, Daniel said. Or, the foundation could be forced to unwind the transfer to avoid losing it. I gripped the edge of the conference table. What is my mother doing right now? Daniel's voice was almost flat. She's blaming you, he said. She's saying you're retaliating because you were embarrassed at the gala. I felt my throat burn, but I didn't cry. I didn't have the energy to cry anymore. I just felt tired. And underneath that tiredness was a hard little core of certainty. That's her story, I said. Yes, Daniel said. But the board isn't buying it. I let out a breath. I didn't realize I'd been holding. Why not? Because of the emails, Daniel said. My stomach dropped again. You gave them the emails? Angela did, he said. Cleanly. She framed them as governance risk and potential spoliation. She included the language about unnecessary stakeholders and the timeline about locking in perception at the gala. I closed my eyes and pictured those words on a screen in a boardroom, read aloud by someone who didn't care about my mother's feelings. What happened? I asked. Daniel's voice softened slightly, as if he didn't want to savor it. Silence, he said. The kind of silence where people realize they've been used. I could imagine it. Board members shifting in their chairs, glancing at one another. That subtle recalibration when someone's authority stops working. Then Daniel said, Richard tried to say it was taken out of context. Of course, I murmured. But then, Daniel continued. The state liaison asked for confirmation that all electronic records related to the transfer and partnership were being preserved, and she said the state would issue a formal preservation notice if necessary. Preservation notice. I knew exactly what that meant. No more deleting. No more lost emails. No more we can't find that file. It meant the system was now watching. What does that mean for the partnership? I asked. Daniel didn't hesitate. They're pausing, he said. It's not official yet, but the liaison said the partnership implementation will be suspended pending review. My chest tightened. Pausing. Suspended. The words felt heavy, like a door swinging shut. And donors? I asked. Daniel's voice was quiet now. Some of them are already calling, he said. I could hear it in my mother's world. Donors didn't mind hypocrisy as long as it stayed private, but they hated risk. Risk made them look foolish. What happens to my mother? I asked, and the question surprised me as it left my mouth. A part of me still wanted to know if she'd be okay, even after everything. Daniel was silent for a moment. Then he said, The board chair asked her to step out of the meeting. My stomach twisted. Step out? Yes, Daniel said. They asked her to leave the room while they discussed next steps. I pressed my fingers into my forehead. The image of my mother being told to leave a room, my mother, who had told me to leave the gala, hit with a strange symmetry that made my skin prickle. What did she do? I asked. Daniel's voice stayed calm. She argued, he said. She said it was her organization. She said she built it. She said she deserved respect. And the board chair said the foundation belongs to its mission, he said. Not to one person. I swallowed hard. Mission. The word my mother used like a brand. Now it was being used like a standard. Emily, Daniel said, are you sitting down? I already was, but my stomach tightened anyway. Yes. The board voted, he said. On what? To form an independent committee to review governance and asset stewardship, he said, and to temporarily remove your mother from decision-making authority while the review happens. My throat went dry. Remove her. Daniel's voice was steady. Yes. Effective immediately. I sat very still. My heart hammered, but my body felt oddly quiet, like a shock settling deep. Daniel continued. They also voted to suspend Madison's appointment. She's not director of anything until the review is complete. I closed my eyes. I pictured Madison's smile at the gala. The way she'd stood up like a queen being crowned. The way my mother had called her my daughter. Now that title was just air. And Richard? I asked. Daniel's answer was blunt. They asked him to provide documentation about the trust structure and any personal benefit, he said. He got angry. He said they were accusing him of theft. My throat tightened. Theft. The word No one wanted to say out loud, but everyone was starting to circle around. What now? I asked. Daniel exhaled. Now your mom will try to control the narrative, he said. She'll call the board traitors. She'll call you vindictive. She'll threaten lawsuits. But she's lost the room. Everyone. I stared at the conference room wall, at the framed print of a skyline, and felt something settle in my chest. Not happiness, not victory, just a quiet inevitability. The system didn't care about my mother's tone. It cared about clauses. Daniel's voice softened again. Emily, he said, I need to tell you something before you hear it from her. My stomach tightened. Tell me what? There's going to be a public statement, he said. And your name may be mentioned. My heart jumped. Why? Because the board chair asked who raised the restricted gift agreement, he said. Angela said, it came from you. I felt a rush of panic. I didn't want my name out there. Daniel's voice stayed calm. I know, he said, but you don't get to stay invisible while they use your life like a prop. If your mom wants to blame you, she will. Whether the statement includes you or not. I swallowed hard. I could already see it. My mother telling people I was unstable. My mother telling donors I was jealous. But now I had something I didn't have last night. Paper, and a board that was suddenly afraid. Daniel lowered his voice. One more thing, he said. The liaison requested a copy of the gala presentation slide deck. My stomach dropped. Why? I asked. Daniel's answer came quietly. Because your mom announced the trust and Madison's appointment publicly, he said. And if the partnership agreement required prior disclosure and approval before leadership changes tied to asset stewardship, that announcement might itself be a breach. A breath left me in a shaky exhale. The gala slide. The thing my mother thought was a victory. The thing she put on a screen to impress donors. It might be the thing that collapses her. I sat very still, my hands cold, my mouth dry, my heart pounding hard enough to feel in my fingertips. I could almost see the chain reaction. Donors backing away. The partnership suspending. The board scrambling. My mother furious and unmoored. And somewhere in all of that, the woman who had been told to leave, the woman whose name had been hidden behind a podium, was now the reason the truth couldn't be buried. When I walked back to my desk a few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. A new voicemail. From my mother. I didn't listen to it yet. I just stared at the notification and felt a quiet certainty settle over me. Last night, she thought she'd erased me. Today, she was finding out that erasing someone who knows how documents work is not the same as making them disappear. I listened to my mother's voicemail in my car after work, sitting in the parking lot with the engine off and the heater running low. I didn't want her voice in my apartment. I didn't want it in my kitchen. I wanted a contained space where I could end it by pressing a button. Her voice came through tight and controlled at first, the way it did when she was trying to sound reasonable for the record. Emily, she said, we need to talk. This has gone too far. Ed. Then the control slipped, just enough to reveal the panic underneath. I don't know what Daniel thinks he's doing, but he's put us in a terrible position. Us again. Not the foundation. Not the mission. Us. I need you to fix this, she continued. You need to call whoever you called. You need to tell them there's been a misunderstanding. You have no idea what you're doing. There was a pause, and when she spoke again, her voice turned sharper, almost contemptuous. You're a compliance person. You enforce rules. You don't understand relationships. You don't understand how people make decisions. You're going to destroy everything we've built because you can't handle not being the center of attention for one night. My stomach tightened, but there was something distant about it now, like hearing an old song you don't like anymore. Then she said the line that made my hands go cold on the steering wheel. If you don't stop this, I will make sure you regret it. I will tell them what kind of person you are. Thanks for watching. End quote. I sat very still and listened to the voicemail end, the beep afterward sounding loud in the quiet car. I stared at the dashboard for a long moment, feeling a dull pressure behind my eyes, but no tears came. She still thought she could threaten me into silence. I drove home slowly, my mind moving through facts the way it always did when emotions tried to take over. Board Review Committee. Preservation Notice. Partnership Suspension. Restricted Gift Agreement. Reversion Clause. Deed. Transfer. Emails. Truth wasn't fragile. It didn't need me to be loud. It just needed to be present. When I walked into our apartment, Daniel was already at the table with his laptop open, one hand holding his phone, his face focused. They issued it, he said quietly. Issued what? I asked, though my stomach already knew. The formal preservation notice, he said. And the state liaison sent a written suspension of partnership implementation pending review. My chest tightened anyway. So, it's official. Yes, Daniel said. Your mom's partnership is paused. I set my bag down and leaned on the counter, suddenly exhausted. And the board? Daniel scrolled on his screen. The board chair drafted a statement, he said. It's going out to major donors tonight and it'll probably hit the local nonprofit newsletters tomorrow. I swallowed hard. What does it say? Daniel's eyes lifted to mine briefly. It says leadership is under review and that asset stewardship questions are being addressed, he said. It doesn't name you. Relief flickered. Brief and thin. Good. Daniel didn't share the relief. But your mom will name you, he said, as if summoned by the words. My phone buzzed on the counter. Daniel looked at it, then at me. You don't have to pick up, he said, but I felt a different kind of calm now. Not the calm of avoidance. The calm of readiness. I'm going to, I said. Daniel's eyebrows lifted slightly. Okay, he said, and he stayed where he was. I answered. Hello. My mother didn't waste time. Where is he? She snapped. Daniel's here, I said. Put him on, she demanded. No, I said, and my voice stayed steady. You can talk to me. There was a sharp inhale on the line. Emily, you don't understand what's happening, she said. They froze the partnership. The board is acting like I committed a crime. Donors are calling me like I'm contaminated. This is sabotage. It's documentation, I said. Her voice rose. Don't be cute. I know you did this. I swallowed. You signed the transfer, I said. You put the building in the Hale family trust. It was asset protection, she snapped. Richard advised it. It was responsible. It violated the restricted gift agreement, I said, and saying it out loud felt like placing a heavy object on a table. Solid. Unmovable. The line went quiet for half a second. Then she said, too quickly, that agreement is old. It's irrelevant. It's in writing, I said. It has a reversion clause. Her voice sharpened. How do you know that? I didn't answer immediately. Linda's breath came through the receiver, quick. You went digging, she hissed. You're trying to take what isn't yours. I felt my stomach tighten, but I kept my voice even. It was never supposed to be yours, I said. It was Grandpa's. It was restricted. Her voice cracked slightly. Don't you dare use your grandfather against me. I'm not, I said. The document is. She shifted tactics. I could hear it happening. The way she always moved from anger to guilt when anger didn't land. Emily, she said, and her voice softened, almost pleading. We're your family. We raised you. We supported you. Are you really going to do this? I closed my eyes for a second. Raised you. Supported you. The way she rewrote our history even in the middle of crisis. You told me to leave, I said quietly. At your gala. That was different, she insisted. You were causing a scene. I asked why my name was removed, I said. You called it optics. There was a pause. Then she said, You're making this about feelings. I almost laughed. It came out as a short, breathy sound. No, I said. I'm making it about what you did. Her voice turned cold. Do you know what people are saying? She asked. They're saying I stole from the foundation. They're saying Richard is corrupt. They're saying Madison is incompetent. They're saying, they're reading the same documents I read, I said. Linda's breath hitched. If the building reverts, we lose everything, she whispered. There it was. Not my pain, not the mission, the building. You already lost me, I said. And you didn't care. You cared about donors. Her voice rose suddenly, sharp again. You're jealous, she spat. You're jealous because Madison has what you never had: presence, drive, vision. You're small, Emily. You always have been. You hide behind rules because you're afraid to live. The words landed, but they didn't pierce the way they would have a year ago. They felt like something she'd been holding in her mouth for a long time, waiting to spit when she needed it. I took a slow breath. If I'm small, I said, why did you have to erase me? Silence. I could hear faint movement on her end, like she was pacing. Then she said, "You're ruining my life." I held the phone away slightly and looked at Daniel across the room. He was watching me, still and steady. I brought the phone back. "No," I said. "You're meeting it." Her voice turned furious. "I will sue," she snapped. "I will drag you through court. I will expose Daniel. I will—" "Please do," Daniel said suddenly, from across the room, loud enough for my mother to hear through the phone. I froze. I hadn't put him on speaker, but my mother must have heard his voice faintly. "What did you say?" Linda snapped. Daniel walked closer and held out his hand, not for the phone, just as a steady presence. I kept it to my ear. He spoke clearly, calm. "Please sue," he repeated, "because discovery is a process you can't charm." There was a silence, so long I could hear the faint buzz of the phone line. Then my mother said, slower now, "Who are you, Daniel?" The question made my stomach twist again. Not because it was dangerous, but because it was revealing. She had never asked him that before. Not in 7 years of marriage. Not once had she cared enough to know. Daniel didn't answer her directly. He said, "You should be more concerned with what you signed." Linda's voice was tight. "You did this," she whispered. "You set this up." Daniel's tone stayed even. "You set it up when you transferred a restricted asset into your private trust," he said. "You set it up when you announced it publicly. You set it up when you decided your daughter was an unnecessary stakeholder." My mother's inhale sounded sharp, like the air had cut her. "Those emails were private." Daniel's voice didn't change. "They were written," he said. "That was your choice." To you. I felt my throat tighten, not with fear but with a strange relief. He was saying the things I couldn't say without sounding emotional. He was saying them like facts, the way my mother couldn't dismiss. Linda's voice rose again, but it sounded more desperate now than angry. "I built this foundation," she said. "I built everything. You don't get to take it away from me." Daniel's response was calm and final. "A foundation is not a monarchy," he said. "And you don't get to use public trust like private property." Silence again. Then Linda's voice dropped into something small and vicious. "Emily," she said, ignoring Daniel now. I felt something inside me settle. "I didn't choose him over you," I said quietly. "I chose myself." There was a pause. Then she hung up. The sudden end of the call left a hollow quiet in the room. I stared at my phone screen, the call timer frozen, and felt a strange lightness, like a weight had shifted off my shoulders. Daniel didn't speak for a moment. Then he said, quietly, "You did good." I swallowed hard. "She's going to go nuclear," I said. Daniel nodded. "Yes," he said. "And that's how we'll know we're close." "Close to what?" I asked, my voice thin. Daniel looked at his laptop, then back at me. His eyes were steady. "Close to the part where she tries to save herself," he said, "and accidentally tells everyone the truth." My stomach tightened again. "How?" Daniel's mouth tightened slightly. "Because people like your mom," he said. And statements become evidence," he said, "especially when they contradict filings." I stared at him. "So, what happens next?" Daniel's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, and his expression shifted slightly. "It's happening," he said. He turned the phone screen toward me. A link preview filled the display. A local nonprofit news site's homepage. The headline was already up. Carter Hale Foundation Partnership. Suspended amid governance questions. Quote, my stomach dropped. But this time it wasn't just fear. It was the sound of my mother's polished world hitting the public air. And I knew the next time she stepped up to a microphone, she wouldn't be controlling the story. She'd be trying to survive it. By the next morning, the headline had spread beyond the nonprofit newsletter. It hit local radio, then a couple of Chicago area blogs that loved any story with the words foundation, trust, and suspended in the same sentence. People didn't even need to understand the details to understand the shape of it. Something polished had cracked. Something wealthy was being questioned. And the internet always loved that. My phone didn't stop buzzing. Former coworkers, a cousin I hadn't spoken to in years, a friend from college who simply texted, "Is this your mom?" I didn't answer most of them. I went to work anyway. I sat at my desk anyway. I did what I always did when my life felt unstable. I kept my body in routine, so my mind didn't fly apart. At 10:18 a.m., Daniel texted me. I stared at the message until my eyes hurt. My mother responding publicly meant one thing. She was going to try to control the narrative by force. She was going to frame herself as a victim of misunderstanding. She was going to frame me as vindictive. She was going to frame Daniel as manipulative. And she was going to do it in front of cameras, because cameras had always been her comfort zone. At noon, I ate lunch in my car and watched the live stream on my phone. I didn't want to watch it at my desk where someone could walk by and see my mother's face on my screen. I didn't want to explain my life to a coworker. The camera feed showed the front steps of the foundation's brownstone. My grandfather's building, the same doorway where I used to sit on the steps as a kid, eating donuts and listening to adults talk about neighborhood problems like they were solvable. Now the steps were lined with potted evergreens and a branded backdrop. A microphone stand with the foundation logo had been placed exactly where the light looked best. My mother stepped into frame wearing a navy coat, hair perfect, jaw tight. Richard stood behind her, half a step to the side, like a supportive husband in a political ad. Madison was there too, in a cream sweater, her face composed in a way that looked like she'd practiced. Linda leaned toward the microphones. "Thank you for being here," she began. Her voice was steady, but I could hear strain under it. The Carter Hale Foundation has always been committed to transparency and community impact. I watched her mouth move and felt a strange disconnect. This was my mother, speaking to the public like she was a brand, while my entire childhood sat behind the scenes like an unpaid intern. She continued, "There has been misinformation circulating regarding our governance structure and our partnership with the state. We want to be clear. The Foundation's leadership has acted responsibly and legally at all times. Responsibly and legally." Words meant to stop questions, not answer them. Then she pivoted. Exactly as Daniel predicted. "It's unfortunate," she said, "that a private family disagreement has been weaponized into a public controversy." My stomach tightened. "There are individuals," she continued, "who are emotionally upset about routine organizational decisions and have chosen to retaliate in ways that harm the mission." She didn't say my name. Not yet. But she was building the frame. She talked about the partnership being paused temporarily. She talked about review processes. She talked about good faith. Then she said, "We have reason to believe certain documents have been taken out of context and shared without authorization." Axton. Without authorization. Like the problem was exposure, not the content. Daniel's voice echoed in my head. "Statements become evidence." My mother took a breath, and I saw her eyes flick briefly toward Richard, as if confirming the next step. Then she said it. "My biological daughter," she began, "who has never been involved in the Foundation's strategic work, has unfortunately been influenced by outside parties to pursue this course." My throat went tight. My stomach dropped. The words biological daughter felt like a cold hand on my neck. Like she was labeling me the way you label something inconvenient. She went on. "She has limited understanding of nonprofit governance and has misinterpreted standard asset protection practices as wrongdoing." I stared at the screen, my hands gripping the phone so hard my fingers hurt. Limited understanding. Misinterpreted. Standard. Everything I did for a living was understanding governance and compliance. She knew that. She just needed the public to believe I didn't. Then she made the mistake that destroyed the performance. She said, "The property transfer into the Hale Family Trust was necessary to prevent interference from non-essential parties and to ensure the building remains protected." Non-essential parties. I felt a cold rush move through me. Not because it hurt, but because she just said the quiet part out loud, on camera, with microphones recording. Behind her, Madison's face tightened for a fraction of a second. Richard's eyes narrowed. My mother kept going, not realizing she'd stepped off the cliff. "This is not theft," she insisted. "This is stewardship. And anyone suggesting otherwise is ignoring the reality that we cannot allow emotional stakeholders to disrupt operational decisions." Emotional stakeholders. She was trying to sound professional. She was trying to sound rational. But in doing it, she was confirming exactly what the emails said. She was confirming that she saw me as an obstacle, a variable to manage, a risk. The reporter closest to the microphones leaned forward. "Miss Carter Hale," he asked, "are you aware that the building was originally donated under a restricted gift agreement that prohibits transfer to private entities?" My mother blinked. Just once. The smallest stutter in her composure. "That agreement is outdated," she said quickly. "It does not reflect the modern needs of our organization." The reporter didn't let it go. "But it's a recorded document," he pressed. And the state liaison has requested disclosures on related party transfers. Did you disclose this trust transfer before announcing the partnership? My mother's jaw tightened. We acted in good faith, she said. That was not an answer. Another reporter asked, if the transfer was routine, why was it announced publicly before the board completed review? And why was a family trust created with beneficiaries who also hold leadership roles? My mother's gaze flicked again. Her breath hitched. Her voice sharpened. This is being sensationalized, she snapped. And right then, I saw it. The shift from polished to defensive. The moment she stopped controlling the room, Madison leaned closer and whispered something to my mother, but the microphones picked up part of it, a soft, urgent sound. Stop talking. My mother ignored her. We will be taking legal action, Linda declared suddenly. Against those who have spread false narratives and violated privacy. Daniel texted me immediately. She just threatened suit. Good. Now discovery is on the table. My mother continued speaking, her words tumbling faster now. My daughter has been manipulated, the reporter interrupted. Manipulated by whom? Linda's eyes flashed. By her husband, she said. And the moment she said it, she looked like she realized something, because that was the moment she finally had to admit she didn't know who Daniel was. She had to stand on a public step and blame a man she'd never once asked about. A man she'd dismissed as nice, and the public could smell that kind of arrogance. Even if they didn't understand trusts, they understood contempt. I shut off the live stream and sat in my car with my hands in my lap, breathing hard. My heart was pounding, but it wasn't panic anymore. It was the heavy momentum of something irreversible. When I got home that evening, Daniel was waiting at the table with his laptop open, but he didn't look tense. He looked settled. She did exactly what she always does, I said quietly, dropping my keys into the bowl by the door. She talked until she incriminated herself. Daniel nodded. Angela already clipped the statements, he said. They're being sent to the board and the liaison. The phrase, non-essential parties, is going to be a problem for her. I sank into the chair across from him, suddenly exhausted in my bones. What happens now? Daniel's expression softened. Now the board has justification to fully suspend her, he said, and the state has justification to escalate review. And if the restricted gift agreement is enforced, the trust transfer will be unwound, or the foundation risks losing the property. I stared at the table. So she loses. Daniel didn't smile. She faces consequences, he corrected gently. There's a difference. A week later, the board released another statement. Linda Carter Hale was stepping down pending the outcome of governance review. Richard resigned from his advisory position. Madison's director title disappeared from the foundation website like it had never existed. Donors froze pledges. The state partnership remained suspended. The foundation's attorneys began negotiations to unwind the trust transfer to avoid triggering the reversion clause. The building my mother tried to lock away under the Hale name was now a liability, not a trophy. My mother called me once, late at night, voice small and raw, in a way I'd never heard. You did this, she said. I stood in my kitchen, barefoot, looking at the sink, at the dish towel, at the normal life I still had. No, I said quietly. You did. A long silence stretched between us. I was trying to protect what I built, she whispered. And I was trying to belong, I said. We both chose. She didn't apologize. Not really, she said. I didn't think it would get this big. That was the closest thing to regret she could manage. Not regret for hurting me. Regret for being caught. I told her the truth I'd been avoiding my whole life. I'm done negotiating my worth, I said. If you want a relationship, it's going to be on terms that include accountability, not optics. She hung up. Months passed. The board reorganized. The building was placed back under foundation stewardship, with enforceable restrictions reinstated. Angela helped ensure the community use clauses were honored. I didn't take ownership of the brownstone. I didn't want it as a prize. I wanted it protected as what it was always supposed to be, a place that served people. I went back to my job. I did compliance reviews. I wrote reports. I sat in meetings where people tried to smooth over mistakes with charm, and I no longer flinched when they tried it. Daniel never gloated. He never told me he'd been right. He just stayed beside me, steady, like he always had. One night, while we were eating dinner at our small table, he said softly, I thought about it. I thought about the mother I'd wanted. The one I kept inventing excuses for. The one I kept trying to earn. I miss the idea, I said honestly. Not the reality. Daniel nodded. He didn't push. I realized then that the biggest change wasn't the board statement, or the suspended partnership, or the trust unwinding. Those were visible consequences. The real collapse happened inside me. My mother had spent years teaching me that belonging was something you earned by being useful and quiet. And I had finally learned the opposite. Belonging isn't granted by someone who needs you small. It's built with people who don't ask you to disappear to make themselves look better. Last Friday night, I walked into a ballroom thinking my role was to survive another event. Now, when I think back, I don't remember the chandeliers or the applause. I remember the place card behind the podium. Because that was the moment I stopped trying to climb back into a story that was written without me. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't afraid of what collapsed.